So Tottenham Hotspur are out of the Carabao Cup following a 2-0 defeat to Newcastle United on Tyneside. Let's get straight into it. So Newcastle away is never really a trip that Tottenham have enjoyed in the last few years. Thomas Frank made three changes to his team, it being a cup game. I think it was Antonin Kinski coming in, Papsar from the off, and Richarlison coming into the team. Obviously, there's a bit of adjustment there. Van der Ven didn't play, so we've seen João Palhinha move back to centre half. And deployed this sort of 4-2-3-1 kind of formation on Sunday evening when we played Everton. Looked a bit more of maybe a 4-2-3-1, but with Kudus through the centre. Obviously, Kudus started on the bench this game. But in terms of some of the reaction I've been seeing on Twitter, which is never really a place if you want sort of a calm take on things. Yes, very frustrating that we're out of the cup. As I've mentioned on the previous sort of previews and episodes about the Carabao Cup, really enjoy it. I think it's a really good competition and one that we should take seriously. Because it's one of them that if we were to, I mean, not that we can now, but if we were to get through to the final and win a Carabao Cup, that just eases the pressure on Thomas Frank, especially with things like the him not winning the trophy in England and that sort of thing, or might even be his career. But I think I don't think the performance was as bad as people were saying. I think what it come down to in the end is just two sloppy moments in the game, which cost us. And don't get me wrong, Newcastle had a lot of chances. Harvey Barnes missed a really gilt-edged chance before the first went in, sort of like the first 10 minutes of the game. But I don't I don't think you can look at that game and say that we didn't have chances because we definitely did. I think we looked a lot better on the counter attack. Maybe defensively not as strong as we have been before. Obviously, Paulinho played at centre half. I think it might have been against Doncaster, and he's sort of been loosely deployed there in some. I think against Brighton, he was probably more of a centre half than Romero was. That might just be because Romero is a lot more adventurous with his passing. So naturally, it would probably make sense to have, if you're chasing the game, someone like a Paulinho at centre half, to if you're chasing the game, that's probably best if his sort of passing output isn't what will get you back into a game. Overall, I thought he was okay at centre half. I don't think he's had a bad game for us really. But what I will say is I did notice, especially in the first half, there's a couple times where sort of similar to Romero, he'd run and he'd really jump out into that space to attack the ball and sort of regain possession. There's a few times with where he jumped out and then someone like Voltemada would just play a ball around the corner and Paulinho would jump out. It happened about two or three times in the first half, and I think he's probably learned at halftime from those mistakes. But I don't know if that's just naturally as a defensive midfielder, he's used to, being able to jump out and be aggressive and, you know, really search for that ball and then have the insurance of a back four behind him. Obviously, when you're moving back to centre back, that sort of insurance net of the defence isn't as pressing as it was. But I thought I thought defensively we weren't that bad. In terms of the opening goal from Fabian Schär, there's a lot that's been said about, Spurs not being prepared and that sort of thing. And then after the goal went in, there was Richarlison, Spence, and Pedro Porro all sort of remonstrating with the ref that he shouldn't have allowed that time. But it's just naivety, I think, from us. It really was a moment where we just switched off because you obviously had Spence who was doing his laces quite far from. I think if you watch it back, I think Spence was probably. It looks like he was probably going to mark the short option, and then as he's doing his laces, Pedro Porro comes over, and then as soon as Spence does his laces, Spence is back into the box and sort of Porro's in no man's land. So you've got Spence coming back into the box to pick up his man, who Thomas Frank said after was Fabian Schär. And then you've got Pedro Porro who's come across to check with Spence and's left his man. and that obviously leaves the space for Newcastle to attack. Really naive from us. I think it's something that we've seen in, well, not necessarily in a negative way, but in a positive sense. The sort of marginal gains have been a big narrative of Thomas Frank's time at Tottenham. We've seen that with set pieces, throw-ins, all sorts of things. But that them small margins there, I think we're just a tad naive and we're made to pay for it. Um, so for me, I don't think there was anything wrong with that goal. I think that's just one where we just weren't sharp, we weren't ready, and that's what punished us. Um, but we did have some decent chances. I thought Xavi Simons was looking a lot better playing centrally, receiving the ball a lot more, and I'm wondering if that's maybe because he sort of had that midfield. Before it looked like a midfield three, but actually in game it looked a bit like a 4-2-3-1 with Bentancur and Sarr a little bit deeper. Bergvall on the left of like a three behind a striker. But we definitely had some chances. There was a brilliant bit of play where I think the ball come to Brennan Johnson after quite a few passes. Johnson put it, headed it across to, no, I think it was Simmons who headed it across to Johnson. Johnson put a really good ball into the box, but Richarlison just wasn't on his toes. And there's another one where Simmons was coming through the middle. Really nice counter attack, which put out to Johnson, who just got it horribly wrong and just shanked it wide. But I think from watching this game, Richarlison, it's such a tough one because it feels like he goes in a cycle all the time of sort of having a few good games, getting injured, coming back, maybe taking, I don't know, 6 or 7 games to get fully back up to speed, and then sort of getting injured. And I don't know how sustainable that is, if it is at all, especially when you've got Solanke with his injury concerns, Tell who's adapting to a new league, Kola Muani who's coming up to sharpness, and there was a lot of good play from. I say a lot. There was a lot of good hold up play from Richarlison on on Wednesday night, but it just feels like when it come to being in the box and looking to attack, I just felt like he was off it. He just looked a little bit sharp. I thought the time of his runs was very weird, and he just sort of. I don't know if it was because the timing of his runs, but it felt like every ball that come into the box, he was on the floor, like trying to get to it. Not in terms of being fouled, but in terms of like I don't know, maybe being a yard or two off it and thinking that if he was to throw his whole body at that situation, maybe that would come through. There's another one sort of where Paulinho found it on the corner of their box, done a lovely little drop of the shoulder, put a really teasing ball across, and he just wasn't alert. And the one that we nearly got a really good chance from was the Brennan Johnson one drilled across the box, and Richarlison just wasn't sharp at all. And I wonder if that's why he sort of flew himself at it, or thrown himself at it, I should say. But I felt like one of them where if he just stayed on his feet and was just a bit more aware, he would be left with an easy tap in. Did have a chance after half time as well, just before half time, I should say, where the ball come into the box and is a little like sort of dinked cross, and it was straight at Ramsdale. And it's one of them where, for me, I think and it look, this could well be sort of a knock-on factor of Harry Kane not being at Spurs. But I thought he had to score that. He put it straight at Ramsdale, and it's one of them which I've seen fall to someone like Kane so many times, and he'd put it away effortlessly. And obviously, Richarlison's not that same caliber of player, but you'd still expect him to put that one away. And yeah, and then we went into the break 1-0 down, but definitely not out of the game. And then, just as Spurs are sort of getting into the second half, sort of getting their feet, working out a way they can get back into the game, it's then 2-0. Really good pressing by Newcastle to really hurry Kevin Danso, who he lost control of the ball. He just tried that sort of pass that Romero loves, that sort of drilled into the feet. sort of whipped pass, and it didn't come off. Newcastle get the ball back, go down the left hand side, cross the ball in to Walter Mada, and I think Kinski's got to take the blame for this goal. He come charging out, and in hindsight, you could say he was never going to get there. But even when he did come charging out, as the ball's coming into the box, it was almost like you could see what was coming, and that you had a glimpse into it because Walter Mada was going to win the header, and Kinski came out too late to try and put him off. And by the time that Kinski'd sort of thrown an arm at it, the ball was already, sort of heading towards Walter Mada, who just had a bit of an easy header. Um, so that's frustrating. Um, and yeah, and then I think the game sort of fizzled out after that. Um, I've seen, some people saying about he's thrown the League Cup. Why is he thrown the League Cup? We need trophies. Winning culture is, built on consistently, challenging for these sorts of trophies, regardless of, the reputation of them. And one thing I will say is, if you were to, as a neutral, watch that game back, I'd suggest that that wasn't as bad as people thought it was. I thought we really did have some chances, and then the second goal just killed it for us. And then we, sort of had a few half chances, a few ventures forward, but there's no way that Thomas Frank was throwing that competition. I just find it ridiculous, some of the stuff that people were saying about Frank, and I even seen some people saying about Thomas Frank needs to go. I'd be surprised if we're 15, 16 games in to new reign. And I think one thing that you need to which sort of softens the blow, is if you look at the fixtures coming up, we've got Chelsea on Saturday, we've got Copenhagen, which is now becoming a lot more of an important game because of the Monaco draw. We've then got Man United, we've got PSG, Arsenal, Newcastle, all in our next 6 games. And going into that, you've got to think. I've seen some people criticising the team selection. Mohamed Kudus has played pretty much every single game this season for Spurs, and I think has been our best player. A lot of what we do goes through him, and this isn't FIFA or Football Manager. You can't just pick the same player relentlessly every single game and expect him to be at sort of optimum performance. That's just not how football works. And then you factor into that the injuries that we've got. A lot of the narrative about last season was injuries, but that's quietly sort of continued at the same pace this season. You've obviously got Madison, Kulusevski, Solanke, Dragoshin, Davies, Koto Takai, Archie Gray. That's at least 7. Odegaard missed this game through injury, and I think there's a few more as well, which I'm definitely missing. But that's 8 injuries in a squad of around 25, 26. So then you've got really, at the minute, a core of about 18 players that you need to manage the season in a crucial period of the month where, like I said, we've got games in the Champions League, which are, I wouldn't say PSG's a must win, but the Copenhagen game is becoming more and more important because of that draw in Monaco. PSG, I think, is a bit of a free hit, like it was in the Super Cup. But then you've got, obviously, like I mentioned, Newcastle, Chelsea, Man United, and Arsenal all in the next 4 league games. And then you factor in that AFCON's coming in January. So the likes of Papsar are going to be going. I think Basuma might be as well. Not that he's featured this season, but there's a lot of obstacles that are coming up across the season as they do every year. And us going out of the Carabao Cup, definitely, definitely, I would have preferred us to stay in it and for us to be getting to around late February, March and see us in a League Cup final. However, you can also be disappointed that we didn't go through and also see that we've probably got a bit more bigger fish to fry over the course of the next month. And you're seeing it with Crystal Palace, who I think are going to have to play 4 games in 8 days. And with our injury record over the last 2 seasons, really, And the sort of obstacles that do come up, injuries are going to come up over the course of the season. Having a core of around 18, 19 players to manage two games, at least two games a week, up until probably the end of December, that is a big ask. And sometimes I think you need to see the bigger picture. And this, I don't want this to come across as patronising and say that, you're wrong, because I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I think, yes, I'm disappointed we're not in the League Cup, but also we've got a pretty season-defining month coming up in terms of, you know, the road that we're going to go down under Thomas Frank, what we're going to look like in the big games, where we need to improve. I think all of that is going to be really, really telling across the next month. And, next up is Chelsea at home in the league. I don't think we've beat them since 2023 when Oliver Skip scored. Thomas Frank does have a good record against Chelsea, though. Um, I think he's won three, drawn three, and lost three, which doesn't sound amazing. That's only like a 1-in-3 record, but you factor in that it was Brentford, and that's been not the Brentford now that you see in terms of a lot more of a finished product. That's been Brentford since they've come up, since before David Raya became a top keeper, before Ivan Toney got his move, before Brian Mbeumo got his move, before Visser become this sort of player. Thomas Frank's always adapting, and I feel like this season is a bit of a free hit for him, um, in terms of like I don't feel like he needs to win anything this season to keep his job, and it shouldn't be that way for a manager just coming in. But obviously, all of us want success. We all seen what happened in Bilbao, and we all want that again. And sometimes, you know, life just doesn't give you what you want, and then sometimes it does when you least expect it. But I feel like moving forward, this game is going to be really, really defining, because I think if it's one where we go and we really put in a good performance and win, I feel like that will give Thomas Frank a lot more leeway. And I'm not saying that he's under pressure or anything like that. I think you could probably, barring disaster in the league, I think he's probably, quite in a comfortable position. But it's one of them which, if we were to go out and beat Chelsea, I think that's one where all of a sudden you think of the most recent results where, a loss to Newcastle, draw to Monaco, some of the draws that we had before the international break, they become a lot more forgettable if we get a result on Saturday against Chelsea, and especially if it's in a bit of a convincing manner, because I think they're there to be got at, but also I think they're going to come to play against us. And Maresca, I think there's been, some little whispers that he might not be 100%, the man for Chelsea moving forward. And we need to sort of strike while the iron's hot and really take advantage of that, because I think if Chelsea are going to come and play against us, I think that's going to play into our hands. Um, and I hope that they do. Um, but I'm also aware that Chelsea have got a really good record against us. Um, but then Thomas Frank's got a really good record against Chelsea, so something's got to give, especially Thomas Frank's 1-in-3 record against Chelsea. But I'm quietly a bit more confident. Um, I think in an attacking sense and just general play, we probably were a bit of an easier watch against Newcastle going forward than we were against Everton. Um, Looked to be playing a bit more through the middle, and I don't know if that's because João Palhinha was put to centre back, and then you've got sort of Bentancur and Sars at double pivot, where one's not necessarily tied down to being the defensive sort of anchor in that too. I think they're both similar players, and I think that in that system we played forward a lot more. But I also think that João Palhinha is going to have to play midfield on Saturday, because he's been an absolute rock, and Chelsea have got a strong midfield like they should do for spending as much as they have on the midfield. But if Paulinho is to come back into midfield, I hope that doesn't sort of disrupt the sort of rhythm that Xavi Simons was building up on Wednesday, because he was getting a bit more involved, looked a bit more physical, rode the challenges when he was fouled, drove through the middle, and I feel like there's definitely a player there. I don't think that's a hot take at all, but I definitely feel like we need to play to his strengths a lot more, because at the minute, barring Kudus, our creativity is solely based on Simmons. So I think we need to put the right things in place, the right sort of team selection, and play in a way that gets him on the ball and gets him forward and gets him into those positions where he will get a shot off from distance, like he can punish teams like we've seen in the Euros a few years ago. He did have one, I think, that it looked like it was tipped over by Ramsdale, but it wasn't. But hopefully he can uh, he can break his Tottenham duct. I think that's the phrase, or open his account, shall we say, this Saturday against Chelsea. So hopefully, we're coming back to you with the next episode celebrating 3 points against Chelsea for the first time in a while. Um, and if you're watching this now, the Being Spurs documentary, which I've been working on for quite a while now, is live at 5 p.m. on today, the 31st of October. So if that is something you're interested in, please give it a watch, because I spoke to some really, I don't know how you'd say it, people whose opinion I really value around Tottenham, and I think yeah, it's just quite a nice little chat about what sort of binds us with Tottenham and the sort of effect it has in our lives. And this a piece that I've put out which I'm really proud of, and yeah, I can't wait for everyone to see. So until then, if you could watch that, if that is something you'd be interested in, that would be great. And hopefully you hear from me next after a win against Chelsea in the Premier League for the first time in 2.5 years, maybe. And until then, up the Spurs.